Hello YouTube, my name is Blade Gaming, and I'm pretty sure it's no secret that I love Ancients Awakened. Not only was it the series that got me into YouTubing for real, but it's also one of the few mods that understands that craft item spawn boss is not a good gameplay loop. And that's why I'm here to talk about one of the biggest things Ancients Awakened does right. It's power trips. Now, you may be asking, what is a power trip? To put it simply, a power trip is a feeling of power and control. Now, usually in real life, this is not a good thing, since it usually ends up leading to abuse of power. But in video games, it's got a more friendly connotation. In gaming, a power trip is anything that makes the player feel powerful. Think of fighting the Eye of Cthulhu. The first time you fight it, you probably get smashed, but once you've got a few tiers ahead of it, you can melt the boss that once gave you so much frustration. The problem with most power trips is they're relatively hard to do right. Either they're optional, and most players skip them, or they're mandatory, in which they either feel like a boring slog, or that you haven't made any progress. There's no real reason to fight the Eye again, so most players just won't. And if the game forces you to fight it again, it's either boring because the developers didn't buff it, and it just feels like a waste of time, or they buff it too much, and it just feels like you haven't gotten any stronger. You've gone nowhere. Now, how does Ancients Awakened do it? Well, it all comes down to just how it handles its refights. When playing through Ancients Awakened's meager hard mode content, you'll take on a trio of powerful bosses with significant roles. Anubis, your enigmatic mentor through the game, Athena, the master of the massive Acropolis in the sky, and Greed, the guardian of the bountiful wealth that lies in the cavern of the Worm King. All three serve as challenges to overcome, and that would usually be the end of it. You barely hear from them, and they just fade away. But not this time. After defeating the Moon Lord, you'll probably head back to your main source of targets, Anubis. You're probably expecting the traditional, here is thing, go kill thing. Instead, he demands a rematch, saying he's got one final test for you. Now, you're probably expecting him to get a stat buff, maybe a few new attacks, and this just to be another boss fight that exists solely for padding. Instead, when you summon him, he hasn't gotten one bit stronger since you last fought. But you have. With your new weapons and armor, you'll probably smash him to the ground and feel like an absolute god while doing it. And if it just ended there, you'd be left with a feeling that it was a waste of time. Just another filler boss to pad out the forum page. That is, until Anubis gets back up with another monologue, and then Phase 2 begins. Forsaken Judge Anubis is much more of what you would expect from a post-Moon Lord boss. A much more powerful version of his previous fight, complete with new music, a new sprite, and totally new attacks. It feels great since you're on such a power trip high after you punched his first phase's teeth in. The fight feels great because you get the power trip of defeating the first phase easily, and the second phase amps up the difficulty enough, and it changes enough where it feels like a different fight. It doesn't feel like you've wasted your time, and it still feels like you've made progress. After defeating Anubis, he gives you a statue and tells you to go after the other two bosses from his trio. Defeat Greed and Athena again, and they will both have a similar second phase. After defeating them as well, you could insert the two mysterious items you got from them, as well as the statue from Anubis, into an altar at the edge of the world to forge them into the powerful artifact known as the Equinox Worm. Doing this attacks the attention of literal gods, who invite you to challenge them. This leads into the mod's endgame, which has you fighting nigh unbeatable gods. This entire sequence is one big power trip, kicking in the teeth of your old foes, and still defeating them when they go Super Saiyan on you. Then, fusing their drops into an artifact that makes the very gods of this world take notice. It's easily my favorite part of the mod, and serves to show just how much this mod shines when given the chance. Even if the fights are too easy. But that's not the only time that Ancients Awakened flexes its power trips. The current final boss manages to sneak in some too. Throughout the game, you'll face two duos of chaotic beings as you march your way to the final boss. The feral abominations known as the Grips of Chaos, and the spoiled heirs to chaos known as the Sisters of Discord. Both bosses are difficult for their tiers, because they require the player to keep track of two different boss level enemies at the same time. They are the perfect target for power trips because of how much the players will often struggle with them. And then the final boss comes along. Shendoragon is massive, has lots of attacks, and has a great theme. And halfway through both of his phases, he summons first the Grips, and then the Sisters as minions. Both of them have received power buffs, but you still melt through their health bars in seconds, leading to an incredibly satisfying power trip when you blow away the enemies that once gave you so much trouble. It doesn't feel like you wasted your time because they are only minions, just a minor distraction to add variety to the boss fight. It feels great to see your once powerful foes be reduced to mere minions, thrown at you to distract you while the boss fires off a few more attacks. The feeling is only slightly ruined by the fact that the Sisters actually receive nerfs, despite their fancy new looks. Still, Shendoragon is a fantastic final boss, and this piece of power tripping just makes the fight that much better. Now, it's hard to do a good power trip, so let me show you a good example of what not to do. Remember how I said that just buffing the stats and making the player fight the boss again leads to a feeling that you haven't progressed? Well, Calamity does just this. Around the time that you defeat its first major post-Moon Lord boss, Providence the Profane Goddess, 3 bosses from hard mode are abruptly buffed up and shoved back into your face. You are forced to fight these bosses in order to gain access to the valuable material known as Bloodstone, which you will need a lot of to access the next set of armor. And when I say buffed up, I mean buffed up. Every number in their arsenal is turned up to a level appropriate for a post-Moon Lord boss. That's it. No new attacks, just stats and 1 new drop. And it's basically required to fight these bosses, lest you want to grind out the newly buffed enemies that linger in one of Calamity's deadliest biomes. You end up feeling like you haven't gone anywhere. You're fighting the same bosses, struggling just as much as before, and making no progress. In a sense, it's the opposite of what a power trip should be. When done right, power trips can leave the player feeling like a god as they fell their formerly powerful foes with ease. And Ancients Awaken nails this excellently. It manages to fit in power trips while simultaneously avoiding the pitfalls that most attempts fall into. Until next time, my name is Darkenblade Gaming, and I hope you all have a great day. Hey guys, it's Darken, and I'd like to thank Wacky Dog for the pictures of Aatrox used in this video. He drew them very well, if I might say so for myself. So yeah, see you all next time!